In all games, whether they are chess or Counter-Strike, risk versus reward analysis is a core concept that is required to do well. Kill Team is no different. Being a dice game, in fact, makes it even more focused around the ability to correctly analyze risks and the rewards if they are successful. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about risk versus reward analysis, when it's worth to take risks, when it's worth to play safe. So, let's start with a quick overview. What do I mean by risk versus reward? Risk versus reward is about looking at any set of decisions that you can make and breaking down how risky is it and what is the payoff for it. Now, risk isn't just rolling dice, and rewards are not just points. There's a lot more complexity to both elements, and we'll be diving into depth about what those are. We're also going to be talking about using the game state to determine our risk tolerances. Are we going to go for high risk, high reward plays, or are we in a state where low risk, low reward plays of what we actually need to win the game? So, a quick overview of our goals with risk reward analysis. We're trying to find the best possible plays given the circumstances. Very few plays are without risk, but by evaluating multiple options and evaluating them on this scale of risk and reward, we can more accurately decide which ones are worth doing, which ones should be left till later, and so on. As I said, rolling dice is not the only risk as well. Now, with risk versus reward, we can look at it in a fairly simplified manner here. We've got our sort of two axes. We've got our risk and our reward. If you're in the red, you're in a bad spot. If you're in the green, you're in a good spot. If you're in the middle, neither here nor there. Again, the state of the game will determine which plays are the correct ones for you and which plays are not. Now, obviously, there's a thing that's left off of there. No risk is the best risk. The best plays from a risk-reward point of view involve no risk. Simple actions like taking a point in total safety, like on your half of the board or in heavy cover far away from any operatives, or an automatic kill. If you can automatically strike an enemy in melee, they can't save, that you're guaranteed to do enough damage to kill them. These plays have no risk, and they have some amount of reward, so they are inherently usually the best plays. Now, you will rarely get chances for no risk plays, but if they do yield reward, they are almost always the ones you want to go for. This also involves things that aren't inherently dice related, things like being unable to be shot back after you perform a shoot, being able to move and then sort of dash back into cover, be completely safe from enemy retaliation. This is a sort of no risk play, and if you can make these plays, they are very worth doing. That is, unless they're not enough to win the game. So, when do we need to take risks? Playing completely safe is not always a path to victory. In fact, it is never a path to victory. The game involves taking risks. It is important to be able to evaluate where you and your opponent stand currently in the game. Are you ahead? Are you behind? If you're in a winning position, lower risk, lower reward plays can be all you need to get you over the finish line. On the flip side, if you're losing, if you're behind, you might have to go into that red zone in order to have any chance of winning. A high-risk medium play is better than a low-risk, low-reward play when the low-risk or low-reward play never wins you the game. There is certain states of the game where you have to take risks disproportionate to the reward if you are behind especially. So how do we know a play is risky? Well, there are multiple factors considering when analyzing if a play is risky. The most obvious is the dice involved. What kind of shooting attack are you making? What kind of melee attack are you making? What are the odds of killing the target? We can obviously express this in percentages, and that's a very good way to think about it. Is this more likely to kill or is it more likely to fail? Next, where your operative will be once they've finished their activation. So if we are making an aggressive play forward, this comes with the risk that that operative is going to be killed afterwards. If we are making a play where we are staying back, dropping back after we make our shooting attack, or if we have abilities that allow us to return to conceal, for example, these lower the risk of a play, even if it involves going aggressively into enemy territory. Next, we need to consider what type of action they're doing and the points of failure. So, for example, if it's a charge in a fight, the point of failure is the fight point of that. If we want to, for example, fight someone and then move somewhere and loot, now the failure point starts at the beginning. And so we can sort of look at where in this chain of actions that we want to do with this operative, where can they fail? If you want to take an objective and it involves killing an enemy operative, that's a much riskier play than just taking an objective that has no one on it. Next, what openings will this play create for our opponent? So what we mean by this is if you activate someone, your opponent obviously gets to go next. And by making a play somewhere else, you are enabling your opponent to make a play back. Is the play you're doing worth the sort of next turn action that your opponent's going to get to make back? Or alternatively, if your operative has not activated yet, they are in a sense controlling space on the board. They have a threat range and your opponent potentially can't move into it. Activating that operative is now going to sort of bring that space and open it for your opponent. An objective they couldn't capture before because your operative was ready and threatening to attack them if they did, now they can take again. Finally, what happens if the play fails? What happens if we fail our shooting attack? What happens if we fail our combat? What are the consequences of our play? These are also very, very important when looking at how risky a play is. After we know the risk level of our play, we need to evaluate the rewards. Now, there are three primary metrics that are fairly easy and solid. This is VP, how many points are you scoring off it? Killing enemy operatives is also very important, obviously. The less operatives your opponent has, the less options they have. And finally, denying scoring as well is a specific thing. Now, this can be things like denying TAC ops by killing operatives that are marked for them, things like courier or escort operative, or it can be denying your opponent their primaries, or it can be denying future possibilities for scoring by killing the only operative that can reach a certain objective, for example. Then there are more complex evaluations to the reward. This involves what future options become available based on this play. Let's say you kill an operative on a flank and now there are no enemy operatives that can reach it. Now you've secured that flank. Beyond just the value of having scored VP for holding that point or having killed that enemy operative, you now have the future value that now your opponent can't really take this objective back or this part of the table back. And also where your operative is now being positioned. If your operative makes a play, charges, kills someone, is now in a safe position for next turn, or maybe is in melee, unable to be shot because your opponent has not got anyone to commit to it, there's other sort of additional rewards you can get from making certain plays. Now, to evaluate our risk tolerances, we need to know if we are winning. Again, the first and easiest way to assess the game is to look at points. You might just be ahead enough that just scoring the 3 VP for looting 3 times in a turn is all you need to do. You don't need to actually engage with killing your opponent's operatives. You don't need to engage with denying them TAC ops. And if this is the case, it's obviously very simple to analyze what plays we're looking for. However, it's when points are close that evaluation gets trickier. We have to ask ourselves, when should we be scoring points? When should we risk letting our opponents live to score points? When should we forgo scoring points to kill our opponent? And when should you forgo both and just simply run away? Sometimes the risk of a play where you have to try and kill an operative is actually not the best play. Sometimes it's simply better to keep your operative alive. Now that operative is threatening to take a point. If you have something like a guardsman up against a novitiate or a Kasrkin, unless they have a special weapon, the odds of them killing are very low. But if they move out of range of that other operative, hide and cover, and the next turn can come back to threaten that point to tie them up, to be annoying, it's actually worth giving up points sometimes to keep your operatives alive, because then in future, over the next couple of turns, you can actually score back points with them. So what are some factors to consider when deciding who's alive? Well, who is in the lead? If you're in the lead, you can go for lower risk plays. Now, can you deny TAC ops by killing operatives? This is very valuable. If you have the ability to deny points, you can take different kinds of plays. Can you secure total score domination? So what I mean by this is if you are so far ahead in the operative killing game that your opponent basically cannot take any objectives from you, it actually can be worth it sometimes just to not score points on turn 2, turn 3, just so that your opponent scores 1 or 0 on turn 4, which will swing the game far more in your favor than if you were just trying to take points and not kill them, and then you were going 50-50, trading back and forth. Sometimes not scoring points and just tabling your opponent is actually all you need to do to win. Which mission type are we playing also matters a lot. Loot, secure, and capture all have different requirements of your APL. If you're playing loot, killing operatives can actually be a huge swing. Secure, on the other hand, a bit less, and capture the least so, because there's a lower requirement of APL. On the upside, can you score points and kill? If you have abilities that allow you to do both, those can be some of the highest value plays possible. This is part of why teams like Phobos with Vanguard allowing them to do free mission actions can swing games really quickly, they can do very, very high reward plays where they can kill multiple operatives, secure points, and do a lot of impact. Let's look at some examples of low risk plays. Now, we're going to go through low risk, medium risk, and high risk plays. They're going to seem quite similar, but what we're trying to do here is create a framework for our analysis. So, staging operatives outside of enemy threat ranges. This means being so far back that your opponent just can't hit this operative, but you're maybe threatening next turn to go onto a midfield objective. Positioning fully out of line of sight. Again, you are positioning so safely. There still might be things your opponent can do if they commit really, really far forward in their activations, but you're making it very hard for them and very easy for yourself to be safe. Making reliable shooting attacks. Again, that's pretty obvious, but a high reliability shooting attack, something that's 70%, 75% plus to kill, is very, very important to have. Fighting enemy operatives with weak stats in melee. So if you have a melee advantage, again, that makes it a low risk play. Melee is inherently higher risk than shooting because it can go wrong, but fighting something like a Pathfinder or a Guardsman, fairly safe. Making shooting attacks while obscured or moving out of visibility after. Again, this is what we're talking about, being able to go back to safety. Obscurity is a bit of a net you can have. Total visibility obviously is the best. But either way, plays where you can make a shooting attack and then scoot back out of line of sight, it makes even unreliable shooting attacks low risk, because if you take the shot and then just go back to hiding, you're not really losing much if that fails, as opposed to like a high committal close shooting attack like a shotgun or a plasma pistol, where you're within 6, you've now had to move up the board and now you're under threat. Taking an uncontested objective. Again, this is extremely simple. If there's no one on the objective, there's very little risk of you failing to take it. Now, obviously, your opponent might be able to knock you off of it. If you're taking midfield objectives, you are exposing yourself inherently. But that's not as much of a problem as some of the other things we're going to talk about in the higher risk category. Moving then to some medium risk examples, making a shooting attacks after moving into enemy territory. So this is what we're talking about. If you're moving more than halfway up the board, you're putting yourself in places where your opponent has a lot of ways to deal with you, and then they can also be at less risk. So you need to consider, is putting my operative here to get this kill actually worth it, given that now my opponent can safely dispose of them? Fighting operatives on equal ground. So as the attacker, when you charge, you obviously have an advantage of striking first, but if you and your opponent both have a power sword, there's a very real possibility that that combat can go badly for you. In fact, it's often, unless you have reliability on your side, very, very bad to be the first to fight, because in an even combat, if both of you survive but are both injured, then your opponent gets to fight you back, and then they get to strike first and finish you off. So fighting operatives at equal stats, very risky, potentially even high risk depending on exactly the circumstances, but you can make it work. You have that attacker advantage when it's your turn to make a play. Taking objectives in the midboard. So safe objectives are very low risk. Your opponent can maybe make some plays if they stage aggressively. The midboard and no man's land is very scary for your operatives to be in. It's a place where you're at risk from a lot of opposing plays, whether it's vantage points or move shoots or indirect. Very, very risky to be there, but you have to kind of go there. You have to decide, when is this worth it? How much VP am I scoring? What am I denying? Finally, taking objectives by killing an enemy operative. Now in this space, we're talking about weak enemy operatives, things like Guardsmen or Pathfinder, 7 wounds, 5+ save. You can kill them fairly reliably, but you still need to kill them before you take the objective, and you're adding now an extra point of failure. If you're relying on taking that objective by killing them, you need to maybe think, well, can I take this objective without killing them? Is there a way I can maybe get more APL on the objective than my opponent? If not, then you have to go for the kill. And if killing them is worth it, that can be okay. Again, we're looking at reward as well. But if you're killing a Guardsman to take an objective and you're relying on that, you're adding more points of failure. Finally, the high risk category, fighting superior melee operatives. Sometimes there are melee operatives who will beat you more often than you beat them. Those are a very risky play to make, and only can be made when it's a very high reward or when you're in a desperate situation. Any shooting attack that's like sub 30, sub 40%, you're now looking at, more often than not, by quite a significant margin, you're failing to make that kill. And then again, trying to kill a heavy operative on an objective. If you're trying to kill something like even a commando or a scout on an objective, you better have a really good shooting attack. Otherwise, you're pushing into like really bad territory, especially if you're relying on that play to not only kill that operative, but to get you that objective. If you have no other way to get APL on the objective afterwards, You're taking a very, very big risk. The final element of risks is the creation of openings for your opponent. The risk often will exist beyond just the actions you're taking, beyond the shooting attack you're making, and beyond the operative you're using. When you make an action, it's your opponent's turn to do something else, and this will often involve them making plays where they can attack your operatives, take shooting attacks. So if you're taking plays where, for example, you need to kill an enemy operative to prevent them making shooting attacks against you, you're adding additional layers of risk. If there's a sort of a high impact attack set up by your opponent, you want to kill that operative before they can make it, you have to sort of consider that in your risk analysis. Is it better just to charge block them? Is it better to just move the operatives that they can hit out of the way first instead of trying to coin flip a kill? Because if I fail to kill them, if I fail this play, what are the consequences for me? So let's now talk about the other side of it, the rewards. Some low reward examples. A single primary victory point. Pretty straightforward, but it's like the most basic thing you can do. Score 1 VP. It is important for winning the game, but it's not going to swing a game on its own immediately. Killing an activated low impact operative. So again, we're talking things like guardsmen or individual pathfinders that aren't gunners. And I also want to bring special attention to the activated part. Killing activated operatives is inherently less rewarding than killing ready operatives. Finally, doing chip damage to someone. Doing a couple of points of damage with something like a frag grenade or a las gun might result in a kill later, but the nature of Kill Team is very 100 to 0 with a lot of high impact weapons. So unless you have a lot of chip or some amount of reliable low damage output, doing chip damage isn't super relevant or super rewarding. Medium reward examples: scoring a primary VP and denying your opponent a VP. So this is simply as simple as flipping an objective. Much more valuable than just scoring a single VP, because now it's creating a 2-point swing back to you, and potentially another swing next turn. If you've secured an objective, now your opponent has to get that back, and it's going to take a lot more effort than just capturing it when there's no one on it. Killing activated high impact operatives. So this is things like killing gunners, plasma gunners, marksmen, things like that. Injuring elite operatives is a medium reward. Killing something like a 12 or a 14 wound operative in a single shot can be very difficult. So injuring one of those, taking them below half health, reducing their effectiveness, is rewarding to you. Scoring secondary VP. Now, secondary VP is to an extent more valuable than primary, just because it can be harder and it's more limited. If you can get your secondary scoring done earlier, that's quite rewarding, and it makes it a lot easier to play the later turns, not having to worry about it. Here we have killing multiple low value operatives. So this is things like 2-for-1 trades. If you're playing a team that can get 2-for-1 trades, looking for them against those low impact operatives is very nice. Finally, removing a potential enemy threat. Now, this isn't like a major game-ending threat. This is something as simple as like a charge and then a kill. Not, obviously, you can't say it's guaranteed, but if you can deny your opponent those opportunities where they might get kills, where they might get an advantage, that is quite a good thing to look for. In the high reward examples, we have things like securing 2 to 4 primary and denying it to your opponent. Obviously, you can't score that much primary in a single activation, but this is where we're looking at those more complex evaluations. So if you have a flank that's been completely knocked out, you've killed every enemy operative on the side, no one can reach this objective, and you've done this on turn 2, that's going to now score you 3 victory points, basically guaranteed because of the actions you've taken there, and it's going to deny your opponent any chance to score those 3 VPs. Killing a ready powerful operative. So again, now we're talking about what you really want to be looking for in the riskier side of plays. If you're going deep, if you're making shooting attacks to kill, you want to be looking to take out those high impact operatives, things like plasma guns again. The simplest example, things that just reliably can kill, that can just take you off the table. If you can get rid of those, that can be very important, and it's more valuable early on than doing things like scoring points, because if later on your opponent has no ways to kill you, they're not going to be able to score their points, and you're going to be able to swing it back in your way. Killing multiple mid to high value operatives. Now, again, if you can get a multi-kill on something like Novitiates, Kasrkin, Corsairs, any of these like lower operative teams, not even elites, that can be, again, game ending. You would give up 2-3 VP on primary if you could kill, let's say, 2 Corsairs. Almost always that trade will work out beneficially for you as the player playing against that team, because that team just doesn't have the operatives then to keep scoring later on in the turn. removing a high reward opening your opponent had. So this is things like denying breach and clear activations from breaches. If someone has a massive blitz play that they can get like a double kill, a triple kill, if you can deny those plays, that can be, again, game winning. That player now has no more major openings. They can't get the high reward plays anymore. That shutdown has a value of its own. So having thought about this, think back to this table. Think during your games where your plays are falling in that table and look for other options. Are there lower risk plays with a similar value reward? Are there higher risk plays that I need to make because I'm behind? All of these are things you need to sort of take into account when you're making your decisions, when you're choosing where you're sending your operatives, because low risk plays just don't cut it sometimes, and high risk plays sometimes are just throwing the game. It's all down to finding where you need to be in that moment by evaluating those factors. So in conclusion, risk and reward should play an integral part in your decision-making process. Break down the risks of each play you're making, break down the rewards, and then think about where are we currently in this game. If you're behind, you need to be looking for what plays can get you back into the game. Sometimes you just have to go for a 50-50 because the 75% chance option will never win you the game, whereas the 50-50 will win you the game half of the time. These kinds of decisions are very difficult to make, but by sort of breaking it down into the steps of evaluation, you can make it a bit easier for yourself to try and figure out what the right play was. It's also very valuable to go back through a game and to think about plays again in this sort of aspect. Where did you take a riskier play that you needed to? Even if it paid off, did you have an equally effective option that didn't require any risk? This is a way for you to be able to look back and improve for future games by evaluating your decisions through a specific lens. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was helpful. I took a lot longer than I thought to get around this. Life's been quite busy. I've got some other ideas. I've got quite a bit of stuff written up, and I'm just trying to figure out how to structure it. So let me know if you felt this was helpful, what you would have liked explained more, and so on, and I'll try and make it better next time. Thank you for listening again. Have a good one.